Good afternoon, folks. I'd like to introduce ourselves. You may know me already. I am Bill WooFDriver Helman, and
I'm Andrew Hager. I'm his co-host, and welcome to the WoofDen Podcast. This is our first episode. It's a brand new podcast where we are going to be covering everything WoofDriver and WoofDriver adjacent. We'll be talking about the Presidential Pet Museum. We'll probably be going on adventures. We'll be doing all kinds of things. It's going to be a very eclectic podcast. But this is the first episode, and so I thought we'd just kind of introduce things and see where the conversation leads us. I really want to talk about you, Bill, because this podcast is about you and your adventures. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do? You call yourself a dog adventurer. What is a dog adventurer?
correct. I think I might have officially coined that term, dog adventurer. And what I'm trying to say there is that I take my dogs. I've got a team of Huskies. 4 Huskies, and I've had other Huskies before this, and I travel all over pretty much the East Coast of the United States. We've gone as far north as the Cape Cod Rail Trail in Massachusetts, and points southwestern almost to Tennessee. I believe it was the Virginia Creeper Trail. And what I'm doing on that is riding the dogs on, you might see this in the background if you're watching this on Facebook, on what I call a dog-powered go-kart.
Okay, and for the listeners at home, those who are listening to the podcast, how would you describe a dog-powered go-kart?
Dog-powered go-kart is simply a cart-style bicycle that is probably built from the same equipment that they would use to build a bicycle. And there's ways to, through customizing and through purchasing different equipment that is geared toward dogs, I attach the dogs to it.
Okay, so what I'm picturing in my mind is kind of like a recumbent bicycle. You're sitting down, right?
Yes, it could be really any kind of bicycle, but the ones I'm building now, are recumbent. So we're kind of laying down almost.
Okay, yeah, that's a little bit more like a go-kart than if you were sitting up on a high bike pedaling.
Exactly. We're dog level.
Oh, dog level.
Yeah.
Nice. So what kind of... how does being dog level influence your adventures on the trail? What does that...
Well, I think the dogs interact differently because they see us more like their peers, maybe more like their level. Like, oh yeah, he's down here. We're gonna have some fun. I just think it's a little more interactive.
Okay, so it's almost like it's sort of the equivalent of someone who gets on the floor to play with a dog.
Exactly. That's a good description.
Okay. So you take the dogs out on trails and how do the dogs respond to that? What kind of things do they like to do? Do you ever get any kind of trouble from them when you're...
Well, usually what we look for is something called rails to trails. Those are old railroad ways that the railroad used to run on. And since then, the railroads discarded the trail, whatever, and the county or the state have taken it over, and they've made a pedestrian trail for people that want to ride bikes, walk their dogs, or take a walk themselves. And it's all legal as long as the dog is tethered to you or the bike, as long as it only has so many feet it can get away.
And I bet that's nice because it would be at the incline would be relatively low. You're not going to have steep hills.
That's exactly right. Almost all, at least my understanding of the railroads, at least in this area, they wanted to keep as level as possible. So almost all these trails are very level. Okay.
And so while you're out on the trail, what sort of things are you looking for? I mean, aside from exercising the dogs, what are you looking for?
I'm really, my main concern is the dogs. I mean, I wouldn't do this if it wasn't for the dogs. That was my lure, basically. They needed exercise, I want to go there. But while I've been doing this for almost 25 years, I've noticed the history. I've started to take interest in that, and of course all the nature that surrounds the trails. It's made me very inquisitive to want to know what's going on here before I was here and way back in the earlier days.
I definitely want to circle back to that history, and I know you have a lot to talk about with that. But for those listeners at home who are thinking, well, my dog needs exercise, but I've never hooked him up to a bike. Why don't you just play fetch or tug? Well, what do you say about that?
I say fetch and tug of war using rope toys and stuff like that. Anything you can do with your dog is great. But for a working breed dog like a Husky, they need a lot more exercise to sow their wild oats, essentially. And I'm learning how they actually can control their metabolism, unlike a human. So they can go 100 miles a day. Yeah, and a lot of times people don't understand that, and they look at what I'm doing and they think, oh my gosh, that's cruel. And keep in mind that on the style bikes that we're using now, the dogs don't have to pull. They can actually just walk, trot, or run with the bike. So they're not doing anything more than a glorified walk on a leash.
So you're actually pedaling as you go forward.
I can pedal, or we can use an electric motor that most of these dog power go-karts are outfitted with.
Oh, that's convenient. That's convenient.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
What do you do? Do the dogs ever get tired?
The dogs, they almost never tire. I've coined another thing I like to say about myself in my description is I can wear out any husky. And those people who have huskies will understand that saying, but they very rarely tire. As they've gotten older, we rest them because they are getting older, and I have one that's actually 15 years old. So she does need her rest.
Oh, well, why don't we talk about your dogs? How many dogs do you have?
Currently, I have 4 huskies right now, and we got a half a dog called Chinese Crested that is kind of just a dog that lives around the house, doesn't go out. So once in a while, she'll accompany us on ventures, but most of the time she's home with my wife.
She's not pulling a go-kart.
She's not pulling a go-kart, but I have taught her to run alongside of a scooter that I have.
Okay, so you've got 5 dogs, 4 of which are Huskies. The Huskies are the ones who go out with you on your dog adventures. Tell us a little bit about your 4 dogs, their names, a little bit about each one.
Okay, 3 of them are males, and they're all relatively the same age. They're between 9 and 10 years old. 2 of them are all white, and one's name is Chase, and he looks like, we call him the Wolf Man, because he actually looks like wolf. He trots and he lopes when he runs. He's kind of tall and lanky for the Husky breed. He's not typical. You would see a Husky and you would think he would be a little more stout than he is. He's also got brown eyes with a little blue. They call it marbleization or speckle. Kind of common in Huskies to have multicolored eyes or unusual things going on with their eyes. It really makes them spectacular looking.
Okay.
Chase, then there's Jag, who is actually small in height for a Husky, but he's got that Husky stature, that stoutness. And he is, again, 9 to 10 years old, and him and Chase are theoretically they're cousins by blood, and they're quite a pair to watch out in the field. The other dog is named Zorro, and Zorro, again, relatively the same age. He's the one that looks most like a Husky. He's got a traditional mask. So he's a dark dog, and he's got the blue eyes, and he's got the mask-like features. He is, it's funny because he's very reserved, and he's fun out in the field, and he likes to do stuff, but because of his order in the pecking order in the wolf pack or dog pack, the dynamics are definitely noticeably different with him.
Okay.
The last dog I have right now is Princess, and she's actually 15 years old. She's the only dog that I haven't had. The only Husky that I haven't had is a puppy. I got her when she was 4 years old. The family that had her had to rehome her, and I've had her since she's 4. She's 15, so about 11 years now.
Okay. Now, you were talking about order of the pack. Does that have something to do with the way you set them up in the harnesses, or?
It actually has something to do with how they're situated on the dog bike, where they run, and how they are out in the field, how they respond to each other and respond to my commands. Because everybody who has dogs has to understand, even if it's just one dog and one person, there's still a pack there. And the dynamics of a pack, even if it's not a working dog, are totally revolve around a pack or a pecking type order.
So which dog would you say?
They call them alphas.
Okay, so who's the alpha?
It's funny. Well, I would say Princess is the alpha, and I'm supposed to be the alpha, which I am when we're out in the field, but there's still a dog alpha involved. Yeah. And I would say Princess is the alpha. Even at her age, she tries to still strut her stuff and flex her muscle when she's with her boys.
No, you had her before you had the other 3.
I did. Princess was about 7 years old when I got the other 3 dogs.
Okay, and so do you think that's why she's the alpha in their relationship?
Yeah, usually dogs are territorial in some way, and the other dogs came into her home, and she wanted to let them know, and they were puppies too.
Yeah.
So she wanted to let them know, this is my home, and you guys are nothing but young punks, and I'm going to show you what it's all about. Playing with them, but also a certain amount of being serious.
Yes. Okay, so who's the Omega dog? Like, who's the dog that...
I would say Zorro. Actually, Zorro will cower to the small Chinese Crested. Now, he's not technically scared of her, but he's just fine not flexing any muscle, and he's the biggest.
Okay. Well, that's interesting, and there's something I should have talked about earlier in the intro section, but I'm legally blind, and I have a guide dog named Sammy. He's a Labrador, and Sammy's been trained to be submissive to other dogs. So when we go out, even if a little dog starts barking at Sammy, like a Chihuahua or a Shih Tzu is barking at him, he's cowering, he'll put his head in a bush, he's trying to do something to show the other dog, like, it's okay, I don't want to fight you, you're my friend, I like you. And it's interesting to see dogs behave like that where size doesn't even really come into play.
Now I didn't know that about service dogs. Are all service dogs trained that way?
I don't know specifically about all of them. I know at the particular guide dog school I went to, that's what they did. And I would assume that that's probably the case across the board with most, if not all, service dogs. If you just think about what a service dog needs to be able to do and the situations they need to be able to be in, you can't have a dog that's going to be territorial and aggressive, and as soon as you see another dog walking down the sidewalk, your guide dog wants to fight that dog. That's going to screw up the blind person who's walking around. And I'm sure if you're a person with PTSD and you have a PTSD dog and your dog's all aggressive and trying to fight other dogs, that's not going to help you with the PTSD either. So presumably, yeah, service dogs are going to have that kind of temperament.
Very interesting. I know that from my dog training days when I was trained to learn about my dog breed that I have, the Huskies, and learn about how to train them, because they're one of the most difficult dog breeds to train because they have such an energy drive and a prey drive. I was taught that with the trainers, the professional trainer who trained me, he would take one of his dogs, similar situation, trained not to confront them in any way, no matter what the situation, even though that dog was actually a police dog. And the dog was just totally ignored my dogs. It was an interesting dynamic. Since then, I've learned a lot about it, but I didn't know about that with service dogs, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I have no idea how you train a dog to ignore another dog, or you train a dog not to bark. When I got this dog, he didn't bark, and I'm amazed by that, because I don't know. I'm kind of a moron when it comes to dogs, so I feel like I'm going to be learning a lot from you over the coming weeks as we go through this podcast. We were talking about the history, and I want to circle back to that now because you were saying when you're out on the trail, you are interested in the history, the people who've come before, the reasons the trails were there, etc. Are there any particular trails that really kind of bring that out in you?
Well, one of my favorite trails is the C&O, which stands for Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, and it's actually a canal that has a towpath with it. And towpath means that, I believe it was a donkey, would actually tow boats up the canal in the late 1700s, early 1800s, to move merchandise and passengers. And this was before the railroad. In fact, the railroad came soon after and put them out of business. But there were Civil War battles or crossings right in the area, and there's so much history because it's such an old trail, at least in our terms, in our part of the world, old, that sometimes I'll close my eyes on the trail and just wonder what went on here, because it's pretty quiet. Some of it is in populated areas. It starts in Washington, D.C. and goes to Cumberland, Maryland. But some of the areas along the way are so remote that you don't hear anything, just the surroundings of the trail. So I like to close my eyes and imagine, wow, what was this like? And it fascinates me.
Okay. So
there are other trails, though, but that is one of the ones I visited the most, and it seems to be that I'm most intimate with for whatever reason.
Now, you've done the entirety of the C&O, correct?
The entirety, yes, which is 184.5 miles. I like to...
Oh, I guess you know that, yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some favorite spots if you had to go out and pick a place to ride?
Well, we were just there recently this week, and by the way, people can always go and see what I do, whether it's on Facebook or the WooFDriver YouTube channel. I usually post a lot of the videos, so what we're talking about today is actually documented on my channels, and it's pretty interesting. But some of those areas, one of the most spectacular areas on the C&O is called Great Falls. And Great Falls has, which I never knew. I mean, I've lived in Maryland almost all my life, and I never knew there was such a spectacular, I'm going to call it a waterfalls, but such a spectacular rock type area where there's rolling down the Potomac River. It just is something you'd think you'd see out west or somewhere. It's just, it's amazing. And you can't actually see it from the trail. You can get maybe little peeks at it along your way, but there's actually a footbridge that goes right over the falls that you can access and see. So we have, of course, video footage of that, but it's amazing. When you hear the roaring rapids and the water moving, it's such a pace, and you're like, where am I at? I'm in Maryland again? It's incredible. One other place I like to mention is called, and this is a little bit more of a hidden treasure, Big Slackwater. Big Slackwater is an area that was washed out because you got to understand the way the canal towpath sits. The canal on one side, that's defunct. It doesn't work anymore. It's dilapidated in a lot of areas. So the ground hasn't been maintained. And then you have the Potomac River on the other side. So you get a lot of washouts and you get a lot of erosion that is only addressed as government funding allows. So this Big Slackwater area was washed out, I'm going to say, for probably 10 years, maybe in the 1980s. And at some point, I think they've got some project together, $5-10 million. They built this almost bridge or cantilever type area where the actual trail follows the Potomac River. You feel like you're in the Potomac River. It's remarkable, and you're against these majestic cliffs and ledges and mountains in the background, and again you feel like you're in some remote spot, but you're in Maryland technically. And I've got footage showing that we almost never pass anybody on the trail there. And this is a wide enough cantilevered part of the trail, it's concrete, that is, I'm going to say 5 foot, maybe 6 foot wide. So the dog sled, the dog-powered go-kart, I've got a couple names for it, fits on there nicely. The dogs feel comfortable. They've got enough room, and you're just pleased with spectacular views.
Okay. Now, your dog-powered go-kart, how wide is that?
They range. We try to keep them as narrow as possible because you get the trail. A lot of these trails have gates and poles, or they call them ballards, which at some point you have to squeeze through, or you have to get through to access the trail. Usually they're there where there's trail access to roads and where people will enter and exit the trail, and they have these there so people can't ride motor-powered vehicles on there, such as cars and ATVs. So usually there's a rule that they're not supposed to be less than 36 inches. 36 inches is usually a minimum. So we've got one bike, and it's amazing because it's 4 wheels. These bikes, a lot of these bikes are on 4 wheels, and it's about 32 or 33 and a half inches wide. With the dogs, it's wider, so still we could be a little wide, so sometimes we'll have to take the dogs off. And people, you might see me in an orange vest. I can hook the dog to there easily. But some of the bikes can get as wide as 40-some inches. Okay,
I want to hear about your vest, because you mentioned that. You're talking about hooking your dogs. You hooked 4 dogs to a vest.
The guy that trained me, my dog trainer, who unfortunately isn't around anymore. He's passed away. I loved him dearly, and he became one of my best friends. He was, again, military police style dog trainer, and he was always looking for the best interest of the dog, and he was always interested in how dogs function in the capacity assisting humans in military style situations. So he was working on developing a vest that a paratrooper or somebody could jump out of a helicopter or be lowered down with a dog if they needed to do a mission, maybe just search and rescue somebody. But so he was working on developing that kind of vest, and I took in my mind, I said, wow, because I know the Huskies have so much pulling power, and if I put them on a leash, they'll pull my arm out of my socket. And I knew that if I'm going to do these adventures out on the trail, I need to possibly have a way to get them off of the bike in a controllable fashion that I can take hold of all of them at one time. So I said maybe I could work with John, was his name, John, and put one of these vests together that since they're strong enough to be dropped down by a helicopter, they got to be strong enough to hold all 4 of my dogs.
Okay.
So I developed a vest like that, and they have a place that I can tether all the dogs to, 2 on each side, and the dogs can't pull me over because my body's centered over them, and they can't escape from it, certainly. They stay well controlled.
Have you ever jumped out of a helicopter with your dogs?
Never jumped out of a helicopter, but I have met the helicopter zombie.
Oh,
you
yeah.
might know.
Yes, the helicopter zombie, Jim Crut. Jim, if you're listening, hello. Yes. So, again, thinking about history, how has your love of history sort of expressed itself in other areas beyond the trail?
Well, I've got involved in the project that you're very familiar with called the Presidential Pet Museum, and that really piqued my interest when I found out about it, because from our first president to the current president, even though he doesn't have a pet, just documenting and learning about all the pets and their influence, companions for most presidents, but some presidents, they were just working animals. So I enjoy, and still today enjoy, learning about that history.
So what's your role with the Presidential Pet Museum?
Officially, my title is curator, but I actually took the Presidential Pet Museum over from the former, I guess, the founder of it. Her name was Claire McLean, and I was able to move into her shoes, basically, take it over and try to move it along and get more notoriety for it and let people enjoy all the artifacts and photos and documentation we have that she assembled and that I've been working on assembling.
And for those of you at home, the way I got to meet Bill was I came on board to work for the Presidential Pet Museum to do some freelance writing, and now I'm employed as the historian in residence at the Presidential Pet Museum. So if you ever need to email me, historian@presidentialpetmuseum.com, email me with all of your presidential pet questions. So you took this over from Claire McLean. She'd been running it for what, 30 years or close to that?
Close to 30 years. And the story that I understand, because I spent some time with Claire, and she had told us that when she first put it together, there was people would actually be bussed in to her home. That's where she ran it out of. And there were lines of people spanning a block or longer, supposedly, to get into her home to see what she had. And there were, tour buses. Of course, she was in the Washington, D.C. area, so people were coming there to see the history of the United States. There are other buildings, Smithsonian, the White House, whatever. Mm-hmm. So it was natural that they'd want to see that, but it was kind of interesting.
Now, since you have taken over the museum, it's been in the process of looking for a permanent home. What kind of goals or plans do you see for the future with the Pet Museum?
Well, my biggest goal for the museum is to rehome it into a building, or at least an area in the Washington, D.C. region. So people, again, it's not a big, per se, someone maybe might not travel from California or Europe to see just a Presidential Pet Museum, but while they're in Washington, since it's so rich with museums and other government buildings that are interesting, they will stop by and see the Presidential Pet Museum. Right now we're in Baltimore, and for people to access us here in Baltimore, it's a little off the beaten path because, again, more tourists are traveling to the Washington, D.C. area.
Well, and currently our museum isn't set up to accommodate visitors or anything. We're still acquiring pieces for our collection. So if you have any of those pieces out there, again, feel free to email me. But we're not really set up to be toured by the public at this time, correct?
Correct. That's correct. But when you said email me, on some of the website comments on the Presidential Pet Museum, we've had people that have been neighbors of some of the presidents where their pets came from, and that evokes an interesting story. Getting some of this material together, Kennedy's and Pushinka, who you just wrote a book about, correct?
Oh, yes.
And the Pushinka dogs, or the Pushinka dog family were, as I understand it, please correct me, I've learned about this, some of the dogs, the puppies, they were born from Pushinka in the White House. And Jacqueline Kennedy was essentially raffling them off.
Yes, to give a little bit of background here, Pushinka is actually a Russian dog. She was given to the Kennedys by Nikita Khrushchev. They had a summit in Vienna in 1961. I believe it was June 1961. There's a state dinner. Jackie Kennedy is seated next to Nikita Khrushchev. He talks about these space dogs, Belka and Strelka, the first dogs to orbit the Earth and be returned to Earth. And Strelka had just had puppies, and Jackie says to Nikita, "Oh, Premier Khrushchev, you'll have to send me one of the puppies." And then she forgets about this conversation. You know, it's just the kind of thing you say, and of course she's not expecting anything. A few weeks later, a dog shows up at the White House with a little Russian passport, and it's Pushinka. And the FBI had to check the dog for bugs, not just ticks and fleas, but also recording devices. But the dog did become part of the Kennedy family and did have puppies with one of Kennedy's other dogs, a dog named Charlie. And so, yes, they had 4 puppies, and 2 of those were given to family friends. The other 2 puppies were given to children who had written letters to the White House asking about the dogs. Mrs. Kennedy picked 2 of the families, or 2 children in the Midwest, and gave them each a puppy. And so that's another thing. If you happen to hear this podcast and you know where one of Pushinka's puppies ended up, please email me at historian@presidentialpetmuseum.com, because I really want to know where those puppies went. And, I did an interview with somebody at BBC, and we talked about this, and he put that in his article, and he hadn't heard anything either. So, I know somebody has to know, but we just don't have that information.
Yeah, I came across, trying to gather more material for the Presidential Pet Museum, I came across a photo of one of the young girls that received one of those puppies from Jacqueline Kennedy. And we were going to try to do, I guess, some research to find out if we could find out how it went down, where the puppy might have ended up, and the kind of life it led.
Yeah, so far we haven't found anything, but again, we're keeping our eyes open on that. The thing with presidential pets is that with our current president not having any, really our focus right now is just doing this research and kind of digging into the dogs of the past. And one of the things that you and I have been working on is the POTUS Pets book series. We've published 2 books so far. There's Old Ike, which was about Woodrow Wilson's tobacco-chewing ram, one of my favorites. And then the second was Pushinka. And, I'm going to do a little shameless plug here and just say that both of those books are available on Amazon. And Old Ike is available for 99 cents from Kindle, so there's really no excuse not to buy Old Ike, guys.
For those books also, if you can't remember the titles or you can't remember some of these names, all you've got to do is go to Amazon and type WooFDriver in, WOOF driver, just like it sounds, and all the books will come up. I have books from a series that we've done also that are about my adventuring. They're fictitious, but they're coupled along with the presidential pet books, which are really interesting and good reads.
Okay.
Another shameless plug.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's why people do podcasts, right? So they can shamelessly plug their own stuff. I want to talk, there's another area of your adventures that you haven't brought up yet, and I think it's fascinating, and I think there will be people out there who are interested in this. But one of the things that you do sometimes is ghost hunting?
We do ghost hunting, again, tying into the history aspect. When I've been on these trails, and especially, I didn't let you know that we run sometimes at night, because during the summer or warmer months, my dogs, because they're Huskies, any dog has trouble with heat, but it's always cooler, almost always cooler at night. So I started saying, hey, instead of staying inside for the whole summer, let's get the dogs out at night. Now they're not moving as fast on the dog power go-kart, but it's still interesting. So we come across, everything takes on a whole new persona, especially when you go to these trails. They're not lit like roadways are lit up. So when you go down these trails and you're in the dark of the night, who knows what's hiding there? And then you take into consideration, well, the Confederate Army or the Union Army crossed this particular area, and you're like, whoa. And you also take into consideration that there's a lot of unexplored stuff here, because the parks remained in government hands, and so nobody's gone through there and really scoured it for what may be there. Not that being said, we thought, as abandoned structures come along, we're passing by or whatever, we got curious. Hey, and this could even be during the day. Let's see what might be inside there. We usually don't go into anywhere that says no trespassing, but a lot of these structures are kind of knocked down, so you can just kind of carefully go in there and have a look around. And we started saying, hey, maybe let's bring some equipment along, some metering equipment. Maybe we can see if we're getting any energy readings, whatever. And we were very, I guess, just green at this. We didn't know what we were doing. But for our lack of knowledge, we started getting some feedback. Some no pun intended.
Yeah. I mean, does it freak the dogs out?
Actually, the dogs kind of guide us. They say the dogs have a sixth sense.
Yeah.
So they kind of, the way they look at something and the way they interact, I wouldn't say it freaks them out, but I can see a change in them around certain areas. So I try to explore that a little more, and we wound up hiring a ghost hunter, a paranormal expert, to further explore some of these areas.
So he's a ghost hunter, you're a dog whisperer, everybody's... Now, yeah, it's the stereotypical thing in movies. Right before like some evil creature comes out of the forest to slaughter teenagers, there's like a dog there, and the dog always looks pitiful and starts whining.
Yeah.
You know, like... And that's the sign that we as the audience are like, oh crap, something's about to happen. But okay, so you bring this ghost hunter, and I'm assuming he has certain equipment that he uses, and...
He has some pretty sophisticated equipment, and he lined us up. He taught us more about there's more equipment to be had, especially today with the shows like Ghost Adventures, that they're using really sophisticated equipment. And he pointed us in the right direction, and we actually invested in some of that stuff. And I believe we've gotten evidence of paranormal happenings that rivals or even is better than what I've ever witnessed on TV.
So the dogs haven't been freaked out, but have you been freaked out?
Yes, we've been freaked out quite a few times. What will happen is if we're in a structure, if we find a structure we'll take an extra person with us to stay with the dogs, and we'll go explore the structure. We'll usually locate something, do a little surveillance maybe during the day, and say, that's a good place to ghost hunt. We'll drop a pin on the phone, we'll remember where it was, because remember, a lot of these places are pretty remote, deep in the woods.
Sure.
You wouldn't be able to find them if you didn't drop a pin. It would be hard to find them again. So we'll bring the dogs with us at night. We'll get their exercise in it. Remember, that's the most important thing to me, is the exercising of the dogs for their health benefits, and psychological and physical.
Sure.
We'll go there. We have someone with us to stay with the dogs, one of my team. And I'll go with the ghost hunter and a couple other members of my team, and we'll explore the structure or the place.
So let's just say on a ghost hunt, how many people are generally part of your team?
On a good ghost hunt, we'll have up to 6 people there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and everybody's riding in a... Well, not everybody has a dog-powered go-kart because...
Well, funny story. Can I take a minute here to tell you the first time we did this? The first time we did this was probably one of the craziest times, of course. We found a abandoned lock house, essentially, on the C&O. So there are locks that control the water levels on canals or waterways. And these houses, again, date back to the early 1800s. So this is half dilapidated. We found it didn't say anything about trespassing, and that was the one where we first got feedback using, I believe, something that measures temperatures.
Okay. That
you attach to your phone, called a FLIR. And we got some unusual movements. I contacted the paranormal expert, and I said, hey, I told him what I did. And you can't understand what I do unless you see it. He said, yeah, I'd love to do it. So I have a few of these dog-powered go-karts. In fact, about 10 of them in my fleet. So we made it so I got my team together, and I said the paranormal expert will travel with me in the dog-powered go-kart with the dogs, and I'll have another crew of 2 guys following along, and then I'll get the dogs exercise in, and then I'll have a few more guys meet us at the destination, which is about 10 miles from where we started. So while we're on the trail, this is funny, this is at nighttime, and we use some infrared, almost like night vision goggles, a military style goggle.
Okay.
And we also started using more white lighting now, because lighting and batteries are brighter and they last longer and they're portable enough. We could take it on the trail, but we were kind of going incognito. We're ghost hunting, we wanted to be official. We're traveling down the trail, and we saw a park ranger police officer, and this is a federal trail, so these are federal park rangers, and we've never been stopped before. This guy circled around, and he actually came up, and we said, oh, he's going to stop us. And this is the first time I did a ghost adventure, so I'm like, what's he going to say? So he gets out, and he's like, what in the world is going on here? And I had to explain to him the whole thing, and I was doing a live Facebook broadcast. And he needed my information and my license, and I'm giving my phone number out and information on the trail, and this is getting broadcast live, and my wife is texting me, you just gave out your phone number to how many thousands of people are watching you on Facebook. It was quite comical.
You want to do that again now for all the people watching?
Well,
no. Yeah. So I guess that just a couple more questions, and I think we'll go to our producer Tricia and see if we have any questions from the audience. But you were pulled over by the police, by the federal police at the park, or the park rangers. What's the legality of these, of riding on the trails at night? I know some parks around here, you're not allowed to be in them after sundown. How do things work where you go?
That's, you know what? The police officer, he wasn't so much asking about the legality being there at night. I'll tell you that in a second. He was asking about the legality of the dog powered go-kart.
Like you were somehow misusing these animals.
Yeah, no, he just didn't know. Are you allowed to be on here with dogs attached to a sled?
Because you're not allowed motorized animals or motorized vehicles, so now you've...
Well, here's what I found out, because he actually said, I can permit you to continue your journey. You guys have been cooperating with me. I can't see anything wrong, except for I'm just not sure if you're allowed to use the trail for dog sledding, essentially.
Okay.
And the next, we did a follow-up conversation with his superiors, actually the trail, I guess the trail headquarters. And we let them know, they were semi-familiar with me anyway, and they said it's perfectly legal, but there are issues where if I had the dogs out in front of me, like a traditional dog sled, or something they call bike joring, where the dogs are out on a tow rope in front of me, really pulling.
Okay.
That is limited on the trail from something like November to February. But because the dogs are on a bike and they're technically just running, so I'm not taking up as much. I have more control over the dogs. When they're on a tow rope, you don't. So they were fine with it. Everything's great. The nighttime aspect, because there's a lot of camping sites along the C&O, you're allowed to be on there at night. There's one part of the trail that goes through Montgomery County where if we want to travel there at night, we would need a permit.
Okay. So you just try to be very careful about which parts of the trail you access at which time.
Yes, they green lighted us for everything, basically.
Okay, well that's good. Well, Tricia, do we have any comments, questions?
Well, one thing I did want to say,
yes.
For Tricia, we for those of you that don't know, I know this is a podcast, but we are doing a Facebook Live broadcast of this also. So comments, questions, whatever you may like, you can comment in the section or the page you're watching this on, and at the end of the show right now, we will address them as much as we can.
Yes, and for future editions of the podcast, or if you're listening to this as a podcast, not watching it on Facebook Live, you can feel free to email us at the same email address I was giving you before, historian@presidentialpetmuseum.com, and I will be happy to, we can talk about your comments and questions in our next episode. Do we have anything, Tricia?
Yeah, Joe from, looks like Montana, wants to know how long, what's it say here? How far you run on a typical night.
Okay, Joe from Montana has asked how long we might do our dog runs on a typical night. And that varies now, but anywhere, we'll usually, for nighttime activities, we usually shoot for 10 to 15 miles. During the day, we've gone as many as 30 miles. Now,
you said earlier that Princess, because she's 15, she can get kind of tired. And I would imagine that some of the listeners probably want to know, what do you do, you're 6 miles into this 12 or 13 mile trip, and Princess gets tired. What do you do with her?
We actually designed, great question, we designed a specialized seat that is attached to the bike. It almost gets safety belted to a platform that's specifically made for the seat, and she gets to sit in there. Her harness hooks up to it, so she can't exit it at all.
Okay, so she's actually then a passenger.
She becomes kind of like a retired sled dog, looking at her team as we roll down the trail, and she kind of enjoys it. She gets a little antsy, though, sometimes.
Okay, so it's almost like seeing a real princess in the back of a convertible, like waving
at
the crowd.
Throne. Exactly.
Her throne, yes. Yes. A good question, Joe. Any others, Tricia?
Let's see here. Anne, it looks like, wants to know more about the pet museum and wants to know if anybody had alligators.
Ooh, the alligators. I'll start with that because that's a very interesting issue. Traditionally, there's been a story for about 130 years or so that John Quincy Adams was given an alligator by the Marquis de Lafayette when Lafayette toured through America in 1828. And we had that information on our website, and we were cited on Wikipedia for that. And so the story was out there, and we were contacted by a historian. I don't remember his name, but I know his website is Plotting Through the Presidents, and he wanted to verify that, or wanted to see what our sources were, because the earliest he could find was a source from 1881 from a magazine, and he wanted to know if we had anything sort of contemporaneous to 1828, and we didn't, and he couldn't find anything. And then Snopes took it up, and Snopes went through this issue, and they couldn't find anything. And so John Quincy Adams may have had an alligator, but my best guess now is that that's apocryphal. That probably is just a story, a tall tale, or an urban legend. Herbert Hoover's son had alligators, but it was before Hoover was in the White House, and they didn't live at the White House. They lived in his apartment in D.C., which is still kind of a crazy pet, but I guess in the 1920s you could do that. You could have an alligator. As far as giving a little bit more information about the pet museum, presidentialpetmuseum.com is a great place to go to sort of see the information that we have. You can go through and you can look at all the presidents from the different eras and see all of the pets that we have record of them having. And some of them there's a lot of information on, and some of them there isn't as much. And particularly if you get back into the 1800s or the 1700s, there isn't as much information, and the way animals were treated or seen was different then. You didn't have pets so much as you might have just had like a hunting dog or a horse that you rode. But in modern times, post Warren Harding, presidential pets have become news items, and so we actually have a lot of information about things, especially with like the Kennedys, their very famous Macaroni, the horse that Caroline Kennedy was pictured on. I believe there's a picture of her on Macaroni that was the inspiration for the song Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond. And then, you have the famous picture of Lyndon Johnson picking his dog up by the ears, which, I had somebody come up to me at a show we were at, and they asked about that picture, and I said, oh, yes, I've seen it. And she said, I just hate Lyndon Johnson because of that. And I was thinking, like, well, there's also, like a whole war, you could be mad about, but okay, that's fine. I understand. So there's a lot on the website to go through, and like Bill said, we're looking for a permanent home, and we do media appearances occasionally. Like somebody will call us up and say, oh, we want to do an interview with you for this news article, or I've been on the radio, things like that. So occasionally you might even find us popping up somewhere unexpectedly.
You just did a show, didn't you?
Yeah. What did I do? Well,
APEC.
Oh yes, we just did a memorabilia show in DC. Political memorabilia show was like APIC. I'm not entirely sure what it stands for. The people there were all selling presidential memorabilia. We were there talking about our museum and selling our books, and it was fascinating to see like all of these historical items, these buttons. One of the things that we found there for our museum, and it was something that was new to me, was we found postcards of William Howard Taft and Billy Possum. And I'll just go into this very briefly.
That was his possum?
No, he didn't actually own a possum. Teddy Roosevelt had preceded William Howard Taft. He was the previous president, and they named teddy bears after him. And so teddy bears were really popular, and Taft supporters decided they wanted to have their own thing. One night, Taft ate a possum for dinner, and it was like a 16-pound possum or something, and he was talking about how good it was in the press. And so they came up with this idea, Billy Possum, like I guess Billy for William Howard Taft, and then Possum, and they were selling Billy Possum dolls, and we found Billy Possum postcards. And it's just insane, like they thought that this was actually going to be a thing, like teddy bears were going away, Billy Possum was here, don't worry about the teddy bear anymore. But I guess children just didn't want to cuddle the possum as much, and then the economy tanked, and Taft's, people were probably kind of mad at the possum. I don't know. Apparently, there are... The guy at the table next to us said that he had a postcard at home that was a picture of a teddy bear eating a possum. So I guess that's Roosevelt fans trying to pump up the Bull Moose campaign in 1912. I don't know. But I could talk about this all day, and I don't want to totally turn this into we are going to do some presidential pet themed episodes in the future. That's one of the things that we definitely want to get into. But do we have anything else, Tricia?
We have a few people saying hi and a few likes, but I've got a question for you, actually.
Okay.
What do we got planned for the WoofDen in the coming weeks?
Trisha's asking us. Trisha's our producer here.
She should be telling us what we have planned.
She wants to know what we have planned for the Wolf Den. By the way, we call this the Wolf Den. This is essentially our studio where we're doing live broadcast, podcast, etc. And it shows a lot of the WoofDriver history, a lot of the old style dog go-karts, dog-powered go-karts, and equipment I used. And it's decorated with shirts that commemorate all the stuff I've done, and we call them Wolf Tat shirts, T-A-T, because they're like tattoos. And they're all logo rich, and they're all about dogs, essentially, about a lot of the stuff I've done. But if you're watching this, and you can see on the camera, the ceiling is decorated with a lot of pictures from all the different adventures, a bunch of different adventures I've gone on with my dog. So it's interesting, and we have a TV here that we're going to use in a lot of the future broadcasts for our live broadcast, where we're not just on the podcast, where we can reference different situations a little better and give people a visual of what we're talking about. We hope to be doing broadcast and podcast out of here pretty much on a weekly basis. Am I right, Andrew?
I would say yes. We're looking to do something weekly. I would also say that what we want to get into in the future, I mean, I said earlier, was sort of Bill and Bill adjacent topics. I mean, we're going to talk about the Presidential Pet Museum. We're probably going to do some live broadcasts from trails. We will go on a ghost hunt at some point. And we're also looking to bring in various guests, people that we know, or people who can talk about topics that are interesting or related to dogs, related to presidential pets, or people who've gone with us on these adventures. Maybe we'd bring in your ghost hunter, or maybe you mentioned Jim Crett, the helicopter zombie, earlier. We might try to get him in here. There are just things that we could do, people we could talk to, and we really want to, and then if you guys in the audience have things you want us to talk about or trails you want us to ride, let us know, because we are looking for ideas. So, we've got lots of stuff planned. Right now, the problem is we've got so many ideas, and it's a matter of funneling it all down into something that's going to be thematically consistent. But is that a good answer for you, Producer Tricia?
Sounds good.
Well, I think with that, Bill, we're probably going to sign off here.
Yes. This has been a great first episode, and I've enjoyed chatting with everybody. I hope everybody's been well entertained. We've got, as Andrew said, there's so much to say. To focus it down and keep it simple enough that you can understand some of the complexities and challenges, especially running the dog team, that I face pretty much on a daily basis. I love sharing it, but it's also, I'm hoping it can help others with dogs, give ideas, etc. And adding Andrew here with the historian aspect, and of course his service dog, can make this so powerful and interesting that I think it's a wonderful medium here, a wonderful way to talk.
I agree. Thank you, everybody. You've been listening to The Wolf Den with Bill WoofDriver Helman and Andrew Hager. Have a great afternoon.